Chapter 18. Welcome to the neighborhood. Nick recalled the feeling in the pit of his stomach that day in the hospital when Annie reprimanded Nick because of the possibility of Brooke trapping him with a pregnancy. Having been to Brooke's family's home, he better understood her desperation, but that panicked feeling started to rise. He anticipated if anything could tear him and Katie apart, he imagined that would. He thought about Katie's fear of the glass bottom always falling out on her. This was something of which he had no control. He looked up to heaven. God, please no, I just got her to let me in her heart. Don't let Brooke tear her away, he said under his breath. Did you say something? Katie asked, moving about the room, looking around frantic as if she were searching for something, whipping sheets and blankets all around. He grabbed her phone from the bathroom and handed it to her, and she shook her head and chuckled. No, I didn't say anything all that important. He kissed her on her forehead as he rushed her out the door and they headed toward his vehicle in the parking garage. So, what's his status mobile? He asked as they entered the stairwell. Alexis, she said with her disgust echoing through the stairwell. Honestly, you people, she said with frustration. He ignored that comment, figuring old habits die hard. Not a Ford then, huh? Nick laughed. She raised and lowered her eyebrows, cackling as they exited the staircase. Nick laughed and shook his head. Definitely not, that's way below that little snot. When they left the building and reached his vehicle, he watched with a snicker as she climbed up into the passenger seat of Nick's Escalade. He then entered and slapped his hands on the steering wheel. So, Teach, why an expedition? Nick asked. She looked over with a smirk. Because I wanted the biggest one they had. We little girls like big trucks, you know. She paused for a second, then turned toward the window. Among other things, she mumbled. Nick flipped his head over to her, and she did not flinch. He cleared his throat. What? She said as she turned to face him. Other things? He asked, raising his eyebrows. Guys, I like big guys, she said, clearing her throat and smiling at him. He shook his head, and chuckled. All over. She quietly cackled, and he crooked his head her way. What? She asked. He shook his head and laughed. You crack me up, you little firecracker. Well, you can relax, because you passed the standard, you big oaf. Nick laughed with his whole body and looked over at Katie. She kept trying to hold in her laughter, squeezing her lips together. She turned to him, then to the window, and chuckled quietly. Phew. He added. She giggled. I probably don't though, she said, cupping her breasts. He looked at her and smiled. He nodded. What, I don't measure up, or they'll just have to do. Perfect, darling, everything about you is perfect. She shook her head, not believing him. Don't you go and do that, now. You are perfect, you are everything I could ever hope for, or want in a woman, and so much more. She smiled and put her hand out for him to hold it. When he grabbed her hand, she locked fingers with him. Everything, huh? More than everything. Sweetness, I wanted the perfect woman, and I got her, and as a bonus, you're funny as all hell. She laughed with her shoulders shaking and her body quaking. Looking, too, right? She asked. Only after you've been rolling around sweating between the sheets, and your hair is pointing in 1,000 different directions. She snorted a laugh, and he let go of her hand and ran his fingers through her perfectly tamed auburn waves. So, what is the real color of your hair? She whipped her head toward him. Come on, now, no way is your hair that red. I don't know too many Italian firecrackers with red hair. She pulled in her lips. Okay, dark brown, but I hate it and you'll never see it. He ran his fingers through the side of her hair. I'd love it any color, my darling lady, my fairy princess, my wonderful Princess Cindy. She leaned over, resting her head on his bicep and grabbed his hand into hers, locking their fingers again. I love you, Nicholas Paul Thomas, my Prince Charming. He leaned his head on top of hers. And I'll never get sick or grow weary of hearing you say that. Sweetness, I need to hear that from you every day. I've waited so long. 2 years, 6 weeks, to be exact, right? You forgot the 1 day and 1 hour from 10 o'clock p.m. that night when I confessed my love to you until you said it to me last night at nearly 11 o'clock. She smiled and sighed out more love to him. I love you, I love you, I love you, Nicholas Paul, my PC, and I trust you with my life and my heart. Oh, my wonderful Katerina, how I love hearing that, he said with a nearly perfect Italian accent. Wow, I'm impressed, you've really been practicing. He nodded. I love it, it's so beautiful. It's a song title and I have to learn it right. She flipped her head up toward him. Did you really write a song called Katerina? She asked with the accent. Not yet, but I have one brewing up here. Ah, that's so sweet. PC, if you really like calling me Kat, I don't mind. Why all of a sudden the change? Well, I like hearing anything you call me, except Katie. That I don't like. You're the only one who cannot call me Katie, nor, he interrupted her. My Catherine, I know, darling, and I never would. You're a pretty smart guy, now, aren't you? No, just an excellent student of Catherine Lynn Peterson Moore, and someday maybe a Thomas thrown on the end of that. She pulled in her lips. I hope so, she whispered. I hope so, too, he said. She popped her head up, not realizing that he heard her. It was eerily reminiscent of what happened up on that stage 20 years ago, when a young 20-year-old, Michael said those very same words to her. You know, if it weren't for Matthew and the fact that his whole family adopted me in their hearts, I would dump the Moore. Nick shook his head. Sweetheart, you are the sum of your experiences, and the Moore is so important to who you are and how they rescued you from a loveless life. I'm so grateful to that family for what they have done for you. As far as your Michael, he may have been an idiot, but he did teach you how it felt to be loved by a man, and that's no small thing. I'm sure in his feeble way, he did love you, he just hated himself more. I actually feel sorry for the guy. I don't hate him, I don't fear him, I have sympathy for him. Katie nodded. My sweet princess, there is nothing I'll do or feel more than just pure love for you, that's a promise. Thank you, PC. Katie's closing went off without a hitch. She smiled at Nick with each paper she signed, and his grin lit up the room. Jay was thrilled to see God's plan being executed with each drop of ink on those papers. Jay had a few meetings to attend and wrap up some details about the office they were going to set up in Music City. Katie had plans to ride home with Jay later on that afternoon. When they left the closing, Jay shook hands with Nick, grinning at him, because he knew the news about her house, and was still keeping it under wraps. Nick found this a perfect opportunity to act surprised at the location of her new home. The three of them walked out of the building. Katie had a packet of papers in her hand. She handed them over to Jay. Take these for me. You know me, I'll lose them. Jay chuckled. It's a good thing he's over 6 feet and near a couple of 100 pounds, or you'd lose him, too, he said, pointing up at Nick. So, where's your phone? She immediately felt in her back pocket, giving Nick a reason to peek back there at her empty pockets. She looked up at him. I handed it to you at the hotel. Right, I think I put it in the center console of his truck. Jay looked at Nick. He shrugged his shoulders. Maybe you should hold on to her phone for her. I mean, if you're going to be her bodyguard and that close to her all the time. Then she'll actually answer the phone for once, because she'll be able to reach in your back pocket to retrieve it and get a free pass at her hand on your ass. Katie sucked in a deep breath, shocked at Jay's profanity. He never did that. She knew that meant he was still mad, but holding it together in front of Nick. Jason Pennington, I'm going to tell your mother that you swore. She'll ground you, and you won't be able to go out and play for a week. Remember, I know where she works, Katie said, mocking his young age of 25. She looked up at Nick. I worked with his mother at the village. That's how he got a hold of my manuscript. The little post-pubescent pragmatist snuck it out of his mother's house one day, and then saw dollar signs in every word. You know, he still hasn't had his wisdom teeth out, yet. She threw her thumbs his way, still poking fun at his youth. Nick chuckled with his eyes wide open, shocked at how much he had accomplished at such a young age. And I was right, wasn't I? Normally, Jay would have a comeback whenever Katie teased him, but he was looking forward to having the last laugh when she found out about her new neighbor. So, how about a quick lunch? The three of us, Jay asked with a coy smile on his face and his hands in his pockets. He so wanted to see Katie's face when she found out about the location of her dream house, and how God and he worked together to manipulate that little miracle. After the crap you pulled this morning, do you think I want to spend one more second with you, let alone eat with you? Jay, you're enough to ruin anybody's appetite. I'll bet when you drive by a cattle farm, the beasts stop chewing the cud. Nick laughed and Jay shook his head. No, seriously, you didn't have breakfast, now we need to get some food in her. Where are we going to take her for lunch? He looked up at Nick with his face full of anticipation to see Katie's little fit. Nick shook his head. Don't look at me, Jay. If she doesn't want to eat with you, I'm not going to make her. Wimp, already, he cleared his throat. Whipped? He raised his accusing eyebrows at Nick. Katie drew in a deep breath of shock. Oh my gosh, Jason Pennington, where the heck is this coming from, you little sanctimonious stinker? What is this, your little venture on the prodigal road? Don't you have to go and say something like 1,000 Hail Marys or something, now? She asked, making fun of his choice of Christian denominations. It's a Lutheran church, and just because we have a liturgy, doesn't mean we believe in everything they do. You remember Martin Luther, right? Or do you need a lesson in church history, you little former pagan? Do you two bicker like this all the time? Nick asked. Jay and Katie looked at each other. No, only when she's being loosey-loosey with her skinny little body hopping in and out of bed with men with whom she's not married. Nick's eyes popped open, almost ready to take Jay's head off for nearly calling her a whore, until it occurred to him that he did it once, too. Shut up, you little virgin. Take my word for it, if ever, and I mean if ever, you find a woman who can put up with you, and you get your first taste of what it feels like with someone else other than yourself, we'll just see how virtuous you'll be. Nick broke down and started laughing so hard, he could not hold himself steady. He put his hand over his mouth as he looked down at Jay. You know, seeing the expression on your face when you find out, just isn't worth this abuse. I'm outta here, he said in a huff. Just be back here by 3 p.m. I have a basketball game to attend. It's the SEC championship, you know. I'd ask you, but today you are not my best friend. You're not even my friend. She shook her head and waved him off with her hand. See how desperate he is? He needs me for a best friend. She winked at Jay. So, what do you mean by seeing the expression on my face when I find out? Jay looked up at Nick, who had that deer in the headlights look. What's he talking about, and why do I suspect you know? Nick shrugged his shoulders. Well, Mr. Temporary Bodyguard, go ahead, tell her. Tell me what? Jay, what are you talking about? Nick? What's he talking about? Nick thought about it. As mad as she was at Jay, he figured it best that it come from him, or even Sean. Yeah, Sean would be the best one to break it to her. Teach, let's go to lunch. Well, just have her back in time. I told Scotty I'd pick him up at 6 for the game. Scotty? Jay, what the hell is going on here? First, he and Becca make up, then Nick and Scotty become like best friends. Now you're socializing with Scotty, too? You can't stand the guy, now that's really crazy. What the heck is going on? What's he dying or something? She asked, thinking the idea absurd, or too tragic to contemplate. Nick and Jay looked at each other, trying not to give away the secret. That is not true. I never said I didn't like Scotty. I like him, just not when he's being Joe Cop and threatening me within an inch of my life for overbooking you. Besides, I just thought with his surgery, he'd like to go to the game, and maybe it would make him feel better. Becca says that he's down and out about how long it's taking for him to feel better. I thought a game would take his mind off his sutures and stuff. I gotta run. Katie turned to Nick with her hands on her hips. What the heck is he talking about? I don't know. Come on, Teach, you have to have something to eat, he said, leading her to his vehicle and turning back once to shake his head at Jay. He opened the car door and assisted her into his Escalade. Before he shut the door, he kissed her on the lips. I'll be right back. Where are you going? Just to threaten the little guy within an inch of his life if he gives you a hard time on your way back to Lexington, today, my sweet princess. She smiled, loving his protective nature. He walked over to Jay and grabbed the door just as Jay was about to close it, surprising him. He leaned over and got in Jay's face. Look, don't you go and let on about Scotty. What do you think, I have a death wish? Good, and if you say anything to her about what happened between me and her last night, I'll be sure to finish the job that Scotty threatened. Do you hear me? Do not give her a hard time about this. We both feel bad enough, and it won't happen again. Oh, and if ever you think about insinuating that the love of my life sleeps around, I'll make sure she doesn't work one more minute for you and your foundation, do you hear me? Jay nodded. Look, I don't know if you know anything about me and her, but we really are close. I love her just as much as everyone else. I figured you'd know that by the thorough investigating I did of your family. I want that woman surrounded by nothing but good people who love and will protect her. Yeah, for your little foundation, Jay. You aren't fooling anyone. Jay got up out of his vehicle and looked up at the 7 inches between them. For your information, I really do love her. I care about her, and I feel bad about almost killing her by overbooking her. Nobody feels worse about it than me. I'm only trying to look out for her. I know what the public would do if she ended up pregnant out of wedlock, and how guilty she'd feel. So, I'm protecting her from the public, and from herself. I don't know if you've noticed this, but she's harder on herself than anyone, and she self-condemns all the time. Learn that, buddy. Don't let her keep feeling guilty about giving in to you. She carries the weight of the world on her shoulders, and now she'll be worried about you and your reputation, also. It's bad enough she has one hell of a shock coming. I'm just trying to protect her from herself. Nick backed up and put his hand out to shake Jay's. I'm sorry, Jay. Thank you. I promise. It won't ever happen again. It better not, and you better find a way to keep that crazy groupie of yours away from her. I'm not sure I like her much, nor trust her. Don't worry about it. We have a plan for that. Katie will win her over, she wins everyone over. Yeah, well, I'm not so sure about her. I've got this covered. And what about your rapist stepbrother? Nick nodded and the look of concern came over him. He shook his head. Katie says that she has an operation in her mind. I think she's working up a scheme or something. She's going to present it to Scotty. She won't tell me, but she says Scotty won't let her do it if it's not good or if it's dangerous. A Katie plan, oh, that ought to be good. I'll ask her about it on the way home. Knowing Katie, and how much she loves you, I'll bet it's real good, especially if she's getting Scotty involved. Nick smiled, appreciating Jay's efforts to get them together. Look, we're on the same team here, Jay. I'm sorry if I sounded too intimidating. Hey, that's fine with me. Like Scotty said, she's safe with you. No one will get to her or harm her. He said that? Jay nodded. He thinks a lot of you, he trusts you with her. That's big, considering it's Scotty, and he didn't trust anyone with her, except Matthew, not even me. He's softening a lot, these days. I've seen a huge change in him. Look, you better get going. As it is, you're going to get the 3rd degree about what we've been talking about, and oh, when she finds out where you live. I don't envy you, buddy. Try to keep her from backing out. There's a 3-day right of revision. She might just do that to spite us. Nick nodded. They shook hands and gave each other a short man hug. Katie watched the two men, curious as to what was taking Nick so long. She had every intention of questioning him on every word. Something was up, and she noticed that it seemed everyone was in on it, except her. Nick entered his vehicle and put his finger on the ignition button. Katie grabbed his hand. He looked over at her, knowing the third degree was coming. He thought he would try to cut her off at the pass. Okay, so now where do you want to go to eat? We could go to my mom's or Sean's. That's probably best, Sean's I mean. You can stop right there, I know what you're doing. What was that all about with Jay and you? Nothing, princess. Don't you nothing, princess, me. What were you talking about? What does he mean when she finds out? Finds out about what? What the heck is going on here? Everyone is acting so crazy. Nick Thomas, you better not lie to me. You know how I feel about people who lie. He nodded. He knew that when the truth came out, he would get the worst of it. He was so vulnerable, and their relationship was as if it were on a tight high wire. Really, I don't know what you were talking about. I just warned him to not get on your case. I apologized for what happened with us, and told him that it would not happen again. I told him how much I loved you, and that I was going to protect you from the public, no matter what it took. I also warned him that he better not be in on the Operation Rival to Lovers thing, Nick said, lying. Oh, he jumped on that ship a long time ago. I told you that. Yeah, but I re-warned him to get out of it, that we would have nothing to do with it, and that he better go along with the fake engagement thing. Katie lowered her head. For the first time, she felt guilty about how Scotty would react to her new relationship with Nick and how she was going to tell him. She turned forward and became silent. Sweetness, Scotty is okay with us, honey. He told me, he told Matthew, and he even told Jay. She nodded. You haven't betrayed him. She nodded and a tear fell from her cheek. Oh, it's that losing him thing. She turned her head toward him, not liking that comment. I'm sorry, sweetness. I know it worries you. Let's put this in God's hands. He knows best how to handle this. God brought us together. He loves Scotty, don't you think he will protect him? Katie shook her head. God doesn't always protect us from a broken heart. I'm living proof of that. Nick took in a large breath of survivor's guilt. He now carried the weight of lying to his teach, which he hated doing, knowing it would impede her trust in him. Okay, so let's go eat, I guess. How about this? We go to your place, and I'll make you brunch and teach you more things about a kitchen, and we'll stay away from the bedroom. Nick shook his head, he wasn't sure if he wanted to upset her, again. It was bad enough getting caught in her hotel room by Jay. No can do, teach. He turned to look forward and started his vehicle. What, you can't stay away from the bedroom? No, I can't take you to my place? He peered over toward her with fear in his eyes. Why, because you really are a slob, and you don't want me to see the mess, huh? Nick nodded. Katie laughed. Okay, then, where to? We're not hanging at Sean's all the time. I think I can handle a messy place. I want to see where you live. Nick shook his head. Why? You may not like it? What, your bachelor pad? No, where it is? What, are you in the Red District or something? She asked, chuckling. Nick laughed. Well, actually, it's out in the country. Yes, I know. You told me about 30 miles away. So, what's the big deal? Just take me out there, or is it, you can't afford the gas to go out there and then come back? Nick laughed, again. 'Cause I can swing it, I brought lots of cash. Nick turned to her and laughed, and she giggled. You little bratty runaway. Nick started drumming the steering wheel with his fingers. Katie could see that he was visibly nervous. PC, what's the matter with your place? Oh my gosh. You have a female roommate, that's a Barbie, don't you? Nick started laughing. No, I live alone, he said, cackling. Come on, take me to your place. What is this, one of those, you're a big star and you don't want anyone knowing where you live, as if I were a common groupie? A common groupie you are not, that is for sure. Well, then come on. I won't make fun of how messy it is. For heaven's sake, it can't be more rickety than my old farmhouse. I promise I won't touch you, and we'll have a no-kissing rule when we are alone together, I mean in our respective homes. How's that? Nick laughed, again. He looked up to heaven. Okay, God, you did this, now soften the blow. Katie looked at him oddly. What the heck are you talking about? Just sit back, we are going out to the country. We have to stop by the grocery store, I have no food there. I don't cook. Yeah, well you're going to learn. Nick looked at Katie, and chuckled. Don't worry, I have complete confidence in you. Nick dropped Katie at a grocery store, and she ran in and grabbed some food in a flash. Okay, let's get out of here, before we're spotted together. Katie relaxed in her seat and dozed off for a few moments. The horn of a passing vehicle startled her and woke her. Did you have a nice nap? She looked around, unaware that she even fell asleep. How long was I asleep? Maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Katie stared out her window and noticed that her surroundings looked familiar. Hey, isn't this the way to Christiana? She looked over at Nick, who nodded. So, what do you live like a couple of towns over? Nick shook his head. One town over, she asked, slowing down her speech. Nick shook his head. He looked at Katie and raised his eyebrows. Oh my gosh. You live in Christiana? She started laughing. Nick nodded. Wow, how about that? Another 5 minutes went by, and she noticed that he had gotten on the same state road that she lived on that had the railroad tracks running along it. He was becoming visibly nervous, and Katie picked up on it. Oh my gosh, this is Highway 75. I live off this street, you too? Nick nodded. Wow, how about that, we live off the same state road. Imagine that? Geez, can you get any closer than the same state road? Nick was silent. Katie turned toward him. He looked nervously at her and nodded. How about the same little dirt road? Katie's eyes popped open wide as did her mouth. Oh my God, you're the businessman that's always traveling because you're in marketing and never home? Nick laughed. Is that what they told you? That's not too far from the truth. What do you mean they? You planned this? Nick shook his head. I had no idea. I swear, I had no idea, until Scotty told me where you might be. Her eyes popped open wider. Scotty knew about this? I'm going to kill him. She slammed her fists down on her lap. He didn't know, either. He was just as shocked when Jay told him. You might be. Her eyes popped open wider. Jason Pennington, you are a dead man. That son of A.B. He is such a manipulative stinking tyrant. I am so sick and tired of him screwing with my life. Katie threw her hand up to her mouth. Oh, I'm sorry, if that sounded bad. It's not like I'm mad we live close. That's okay, I didn't expect any other kind of response. So, you just found out? Nick nodded. When, Monday night? Nick nodded. Well, I'll bet you had a little party, didn't you? Not at first, I was too worried about where you could have been, then when Scotty told me, I got excited, until he threatened me within an inch of my life, then I became scared to death that if you found out, you'd back out. Well, they did say something about a 3-day write-over vision, you know. I ought to take advantage of that, just to get back at Jay. Now, wait a minute. Do you like the house? I love it, I loved it the second I saw it. Okay, so that would be cutting off your nose, to spite your face, huh? Just to get back at Jay? Yeah, you're right. How the heck did he pull this one off? He didn't. Wait, how long have you lived there? Almost a year and a half. I found it almost 2 years ago. It wasn't finished, but I loved how far out it was, and I was told that no one ever closed on the Victorian. It had a bunch of liens on it, and all the deals fell through. I figured I'd be alone out here. Katie laughed. Jay said that I'd have to pay extra for it, and it wasn't worth the extra money, in real estate value, but I didn't care, I loved it. Geez, who'da thunk it? God? Katie whipped her head towards Nick. You think? Nick laughed. Is there any other explanation? Katie shook her head and chuckled in resignation. Teach, didn't you say that God has a plan for our lives, and if we choose to follow it, He plans out every little detail, even where we live? Oh, for crying out loud. I'm sorry I wrote that darned book. I'm so sick of having people throw my words back in my face. Nick laughed. Katie looked up to heaven. You think you're so funny, God, now, don't you? What is this so I can be babysat for the rest of my life? Nick chuckled. Maybe it's just God telling you, we were meant to be together. From the meet and greet, to the Circle City, with Sean there, to neighbors now. Geez, I guess there's no real denying that now, huh? Nick flashed his dimple victory smile. He laughed. You're my little olive-toned, Italian Yankee jolt-giving neighbor, now. Katie laughed and looked out the side window, then the front. She then turned to Nick and she laughed. Welcome to the neighborhood, neighbor. They both cracked up, then Katie started a whimpering crying laugh. She then became melancholy. So, God knew that it wasn't going to be Scotty and me out here, but you and me. Nick nodded. There's no way he'd move out here with you, next door, would he? Katie shook her head, and then started to cry, again. Nick put his arm on her shoulder. He pulled into his driveway, and they looked at both of the houses. Katie continued to cry for the loss she was about to endure, having no idea how devastating it was really going to be. I'm sorry, I feel weird crying about this with you. Don't. That's why God put me here. I understand, it only bothers me, because it hurts your heart, sweetness. Listen, I don't want to start something with you until your feelings about Scotty are resolved. Don't want to live with a ghost like he had to live with Michael, huh? Only this time it will be a live ghost. Nick turned his head away from her, and stared out his window at her home. Tears welled in his eyes. Every time she mentioned Scotty, as if he had a future, he had to fight the want of telling her the truth. He thought she needed to know. He knew if she did, though, she'd run back to him, and would not leave his side until he passed. He just got her back in his arms. This would pull her away, and the anger she'd feel about his lying to her would definitely put an end to the happiness at their reunion. I'm sorry, Teach. It's not that, at all. His voice cracked and she could not understand why he was so upset. So, do you now see what I mean about bad always following good in my life? No matter what, that blasted glass bottom, if it ain't breaking, it's cracking. Oh, my little Jobs princess, I'm so sorry about that. I wish it wasn't so, but there's God's wisdom in everything. Nick's fear for her grew by the moment. It was all he could do to not call Matthew and try to find a way to break it to her, without her running. Katie and Nick enjoyed a nice meal together in his messy house. When they were finished eating, they walked over to her new property, which was separated from his by a wall of tall shrubbery. Katie walked around the house with Nick pointing out all the aspects about the house that she liked, with the balcony off the master bedroom being her favorite part. They stopped at the outbuilding and Katie stared at the door. Nick knew exactly what she was looking at, and he stood behind her with his hands on her shoulders. It gives me the creeps. We can take it down, if you want. No, I want to keep it. It has stalls in the back, for horses, you know. I'd like to get a horse or two. She turned and looked up at him. She raised her eyebrows. They are less scary than dogs, now. Nick laughed. You know, I found these two houses, and this one made me think of you. I thought that you'd love it, and I wanted to have it ready for you when you came back to me, but then I wasn't sure that you would. So, I opted for the new construction next door. It wasn't finished. The builder went bankrupt and couldn't finish it, so I hired a contractor and had it finished. That was how Jay found this house. He was checking out where I lived. Now, do you see God's hand in this? If I had bought it, you wouldn't have. Now we own both these properties, and we are alone out here in our own little private world, at least for now. What do you mean? At least for now? Well, I heard that someone bought all the land up around the houses. I'm assuming that someone is going to build a subdivision here, and we'll be crowded out. Katie grinned and raised her eyebrows. Wait, a single corporation bought it? That was you and the foundation? She nodded. Yes and no. Jay and I and First World developers bought it. I didn't want anyone else to live out here. I figured I could deal with a traveling salesman, but I didn't want anyone else in my own little paradise, so we tracked down the owners of each parcel and bought them. Jay checks out everything and everybody. He knows so many people. Nick laughed, then took her in his arms. I'll bet he had your families all checked out 3 generations back, for crying out loud. Nick looked at Katie funny. Oh, no, he didn't. Her eyes popped open wide. I'm going to kill him. Don't, you are worth tens of millions of dollars, and there's evil people out there. To me, you are my life. I want to know that you are being protected. So, do you know anything about a prison ministry down here? Yes, he said he started one down here. It was a pilot program, he was experimenting. Oh my gosh. Your dad. Nick nodded. Your dad knows Jay? I'm not exactly sure, but I wouldn't be surprised the way my father spoke of a young man who specifically sought him out, and ministered to him for countless hours, then helped him pen his reconciliation letters. Katie curled her bottom lip, then grunted. Don't get mad for that. Look what he's done. He has a successful prison ministry there. My dad got saved, he's real close to God. We are all reconciled with him, all because you and I met that night. You see the big picture? Katie nodded. Jay has to watch out for your best interests, and I'm glad he thoroughly checked us out. That means you are being well protected on all fronts, with the exception of one little glitch. What's that? Ka will soon learn where you live, and I'm not sure I like the idea of him knowing where you are. Maybe that's why God put you out here, with me. Huh? Katie smiled and nodded. Yeah, but I gotta figure something out for when I'm not here and you are, unless of course, you wanted to travel with me. Katie cackled and shook her head. Well, you leave that up to me and Scotty and Operation Catch a would-be evil stepbrother who is a potential murderer. They headed back over to Nick's to clean his house. Nick received a phone call from Sean to find out how the closing went and whether it went off or not. Nick smiled at Katie while he filled Sean in on everything except that part about them being in bed together. Sean was thrilled that his best friend finally had his girl that he had longed for all that agonizing time. Sean let Nick know that Scotty was looking for Katie, and he was not happy that she was not answering her phone. I have Scotty's number in my phone if you want to call him. Of course, you do, darling, yeah, I do. While Nick finished up the dishes, Katie spoke with Scotty to get an update. She bawled him out for not telling her about the house, and of course, he told her he only found out, and his medical stuff was more important to him than her knowing that little detail. She then apologized for being so self-centered. They talked for about an hour, as Nick and Katie drove into town. Every once in a while, Nick looked over at Katie and smiled, and she gave him an uncomfortable smile. When she hung up, she apologized for being on the phone so long, with him. Listen, I'm going to say this one more time, don't feel weird about this. I'm fine with it, and I think he is getting used to it. You'd be wrong about that. He asked me if you've touched me. He told me to remind you to keep your hands off, and when we come back here next weekend, you better not be around. Nick laughed. I have shows. I'll be gone until Sunday night. Okay, that will be good. We are coming out next Thursday. We are going to paint and pull down wallpaper. What, no Child's Legacy? No Stonehenge Memorial for the wallpaper? No, because I am not going to study the wallpaper like I did at my farmhouse. As a matter of fact, Scotty wouldn't even let me look at it too close. He's pulling it down while I paint. I love painting walls. I find it so therapeutic, if that makes any sense. I've been known to change the color of a room, 5 times a year. Matthew finally put a stop to it at the cottage. Nick chuckled. I can't wait for you to meet Marjorie. She's coming for an extended visit. She stays at the cottage when she comes. You'll love her. She'll love you. Katie smiled, touching his arm. That's Matthew's mom, right? A memory like an elephant. And a brain like a tortoise. A hare. Which kind? Both, at times. She looked up at him and they both laughed. Well, I can't wait to meet that wonderful woman. She looked up at him. Operation Rescue Fair Maiden from Stalker, remember? I loved that story, and you described her in such great detail. I feel like I already know her. Katie's smile told Nick that she was relishing in the good memories that Marjorie gave her as a second and far better mother. I sure do love that woman, she said. When they got back into Nashville, it was time to say goodbye. It would be the first of many that they would have to say with his traveling on a tour bus. It was an emotional goodbye, especially after having made love and given to each other their souls and hearts. Jay waited in his car, with Katie's bags all packed into the trunk while they walked off to say goodbye. It's pretty amazing how far we've come in such a short time. Think about where we were when you found me on my swing. So much has happened in so little time. Yeah, it's been one of the best weeks of my life. I've loved having you down here, and I can't wait for you to move into your new home, neighbor. You know that this is a part-time home. My real home base is in Kentucky in Shelbyville, because I've decided to give the farmhouse to Scotty for his 40th birthday. I won't be living with him, obviously, anymore. I have no idea how this is going to play out. I'm almost afraid to look at him. I'm afraid he'll read my eyes and know that we made love. Please, promise he'll never find out about this, okay? What do you think, I have a death wish? Kyle is dangerous enough, I don't need a mad trooper, again. Been there, done that. Katie giggled. He took her hand and led her into the building that Jay had picked for their Nashville First Foundation office. Come with me. We'll be right back, Jay. Nick's heart sank at the heartache Scotty must be enduring and the sadness of Katie not knowing that there was no future for Scotty, nor need of him to have her farmhouse. She noted his sullenness. Hey, you look like you're going to lose your best friend. I'll be back next weekend and your gran wants us to come for Sunday dinner on Easter. She says it's your parents' anniversary. I told her I'd be bringing Scotty. He looked over at her and gave her a warm smile. Bring him, my grandparents will love him. Katie chuckled and furrowed her brow. That sounds so funny, considering the past you two had, she said, thinking about that day Nick's head met with the brick wall and Scotty screaming out threats to kill him. A package deal, remember? Katie laughed. I guess me and Scotty have come even further, huh? Nick asked. Katie leaned into his arms, so blessed by Nick's warmth, toward Scotty. He picked up her left hand and pointed to the ring. You keep this on, because we are going to need it to squelch that bull about Operation Rival to Lovers, okay? She nodded in agreement. The ruse was on, and everyone close to her knew it. So, where are we going? Someplace where I can give you a proper goodbye. Nick checked room after room, looking for an empty conference room. He pulled her into the room and locked the door. He walked over to the window and closed the blinds. Is that necessary? Telephoto lenses, darling. With someone of your status and caliber, they could be anywhere. Katie lowered her head and shook it. He cupped her chin with his fingers. It won't always be like this, darling. Your book is still on the top 10 list. Eventually, things will settle down, they always do. You'll never get back your old life, but it won't be this bad, all the time. I will make sure of that, okay? Katie nodded. You believe me? She nodded. Good, now get those lips on mine. She got up on her toes, wrapped her arms around his neck, and pulled herself up into his lips, while he bent to receive hers. Their kiss lasted long enough for them to hear Jay laying on the horn. Nick peeked out of the blinds, and saw Jay with his driver's door open, and standing, leaning over with his hand on the horn. Nick chuckled. Your friend is impatient. Tough, he got me into this mess. What mess, the notoriety, or me? Both. When they exited the building, Katie let go of Nick's hand. Jay had his hands on his hips, and that look about him. Katie leaned over and spoke up toward Nick. It's going to be a long ride. Maybe you ought to stow me away in your bus, because Jay's getting ready to bawl me out for this morning, or rather last night. Don't worry, sweetness. If he knows what's good for him, he won't say a word. I've seen to that. Nick looked down with sadness. Well, at least it was worth getting bawled out for. She raised and lowered her eyebrows. He chuckled, looked around, and then kissed her forehead. He led her over to Jay's car and gave him a threatening look. 10-4 scary artist. Geez, if it's not the trooper, threatening me, it's the artist. Katie laughed and then Nick joined in before he leaned in and gave her a quick last-minute kiss on the lips. Part 3. Relocating and reverberating in Tennessee. Chapter 19. She's moving in while he's moving out. When Katie returned